Hello, everyone, and welcome to 8 Actions to Successfully Implement class. I'm Isabella. I'm here from marketing to be the host as we get started today. So as you enter, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know what your role is and where you're from, and we'll get started here shortly. So we're going to start today off by going over our agenda. So if we could have that. Yes, so we're going to start off today with some welcomes. We're going to go over the new class implementation guide, and we'll look specifically at the 8 actions of class implementations. And then at the end, we will also have time to take some questions with our panelists today, Matt and Lawanda. So we'll get started introducing them and then get into it. All right, so today we're really lucky we have 2 wonderful panelists. First, we have Matt Owens, who began his career in education as an 8th grade writing teacher in Memphis, Tennessee. He taught for 5 years before joining Teachstone as an instructional designer. And then after being a leader there in content development and continuous improvement, he now supports many, many projects that help Teachstone get better at ensuring the success of our partners. So his most recent project was the class implementation guide that you'll be hearing about today. And then we have Lawanda, who has over 20 years of experience in the field of education. She started at Teachstone a few years ago, or many years ago. Lawanda, you'll have to let me know how many years you've been here, but has been committed to creating positive changes in education. She's currently as a senior client success manager. She has been pivotal in nurturing relationships and ensuring the successful implementation of class among her clients. And she has an extensive background that allows her to provide support and guidance to educators and organizations as they navigate the complexities of incorporating class into practices. So you'll get to hear about their expertise, especially as it applies to implementing class in your program today. A couple housekeeping items that we haven't gone over. If we can go to the next slide. This presentation is being recorded. You are going to get the slides and recording tomorrow via email, and you have the chat box to interact with each other as well as the Q&A box to submit questions. I'll make sure that Matt and Lawanda see those questions and that they get answered. And so for now, I'm going to turn it over to Matt and Lawanda to cover anything I may have missed in instructions and get started today.
No instructions other than I just strongly encourage you all to participate in the chat and ask questions. Our new class implementation guide was just launched in April. So we are very interested in your feedback and what you hope to see in it and what input you have on what you see over the course of today and what questions you still have. But we wanted to start, and I always want to start conversations about our new and exciting class implementation guide with where we came from. It was just 1 year after Teachstone was founded in 2009 that the first class implementation guide was published as a PDF, and many of the principles in that guide persist to today. Fundamentally, class is a tool to help us focus on the interactions that matter most for children, and so that we can measure them in ways that drives improvement. And we would go 5 years before publishing an update to that class implementation guide, another PDF that integrated 5 years of implementation insights where our partners in the field, like you all, sorry, I got distracted by the AI assistant that's here. Welcome. So partners in the field like you all helped us understand what implementations really look like. And then for the last 10 years, between 2014 and 2024, our implementation guidance has been distributed. It's been in our free online resources on our website, in our products, in the minds of our wonderful teammates like Lawanda, who used to be on our professional services team and who's now on our client success team, and in the minds of partners in the field like you all. And so our effort in 2024 was to consolidate and make available all of these implementation insights for leaders like you who play a role in your class implementations. One of the most obvious differences with the new guide that we want to feature here is that it is a digital resource on purpose. So it's available on the microsite implement.teachstone.com. We'll share that in the chat in a few moments in such a way that it will be usable on your phone, on your laptop, whatever device you choose to use. It'll always be up to date and easy to bookmark. So that's one of the most concrete changes from these earlier guides. But we also integrated a lot as we built the guide. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that a lot of what I've already said is that we pulled from existing guidance in building this guide. So you won't see massive changes in how Teachstone's, making recommendations in this new resource. We just hope that it's easier to use, easier to share with other people. What we did pay attention to were the questions that we get asked over and over again. How can we make sure that we're presenting those answers in a easy to understand, easy to access kind of way? Because we do get a lot of the same questions from many of our partners in the field. This was a way to kind of inform the guidance that we provide. And then finally, we went through multiple rounds of testing, including with our advisory council, and then a large group of, I think, 70 or so of our clients actually went through a Google Doc version of this guide before we had polished it, and we've integrated their feedback. Also, as we've been launching the guide, we've run a couple mini experiments just to say, okay, you've got 5 minutes, you've got one implementation question to answer. Try to use the guide to answer it before I tell them anything about how the guide's organized. And the trend is that people agree with the statement. I was able to find an answer to my question, and I believe the guide will be helpful. It's a pretty small sample size. That was across 2 different tests, I think 60 something people. But nonetheless, we have promising early evidence that the guide is helpful and easy to use in a time crunched day. So if you go to the next slide, I'm actually going to pass it to Luanda to kind of talk about how the guide is really anchored in this core idea, which many of you will be familiar with, that I'll let Luanda explain.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Yeah, so as Matt stated, many of you are familiar with this focus, measure, and improve that you see here on the screen. When we really think about improving child outcomes through positive interactions, we at Teachstone have an ongoing process that consists of these 3 big phases, right? We think about class as a continuous cycle of improvement. And so, as you see here in the beginning, we want to make sure that organizations are really orienting themselves to the concept and the importance of high quality interactions so that they can establish that baseline for measuring classroom quality, which is that focus piece. And then we want them to measure the quality of the program's interactions on an ongoing basis to really inform those improvement efforts. So once you know where the improvement needs are, you can then begin to provide targeted professional development and coaching that is really driving improvement, and that's based on data. So in simple terms, all right, this helps organizations to begin to really start to name a few priorities, identifying the right metrics that they want to use to measure those priorities and the improvements of those, and then begin developing strategies towards that improvement, which is this focus, measure, and improve piece you see here and are familiar with. Next slide.
So on that theme of, this is building from what we've learned in partnership with leaders like you in the field, we've aligned the 8 implementation actions in the guide to the focus, measure, improve framework, so that essentially we're answering the question, okay, well, how do you actually focus on educator-child interactions that matter most for kids? Well, do these 2 things: build a class implementation team and invest stakeholders in interactions in the class system. And then the rest of the guide answers, okay, how do I build a class implementation team? And then we provide guidance on that. And then probably one layer deeper for each piece of guidance we give, we also say, okay, the answer to, well, how do I do that? So the guide is all kind of lined up to this core 3 activities, and then answers, how do you do that? In such a way that is, I think, true across contexts, which is a moment for me to pause and say, okay, we know that implementations will need to look different based on local nuances. And that's why this guide is less of an IKEA manual, because when IKEA sends you something, they have everything in the box. They know exactly what you're working with, and they are the experts on what's in that box. Teachstone is not the expert on what is in your local context. So the guide will not provide you the exact answer to you should do this in your context in this way for these reasons. Instead, what it will do is say, regardless of your context, here are principles or here are recommendations that tend to be successful across contexts, which means there's a layer of activity and engagement that you'll need to take on to think about, given my role and my context, what does it look like to build an implementation team here? And so we'll get into a tiny bit of that context or complexity today. But mostly I just encourage you, as you look at the guide, to think of it as a resource and a tool, and rather than a strict set of you should do this kind of directives. And you'll see here how we answer the how should we measure educator-child interactions using class. We recommend that you plan how you're going to go about it. And then once you have a complete plan, communicate with a lot of clarity to educators what they can expect before, during, and after their observation. And then after observations, share actionable data with the key stakeholders who can use that information to improve their work, which includes educators, but is not limited to them. And then finally, how do you improve interactions? Leverage the data to do so. Planning, help educators adopt new practices, and build class coaching capacity. So today's webinar is structured around these 8 items. The guide is also structured around these 8 items. The link is in the chat. Megan just reposted it a couple minutes ago. If you go to implement.teachstone.com, you can follow along in a separate window on a separate device. And so you can pull it up on your phone. In fact, I'm actually going to use the guide itself on my phone to kind of guide my brief talking section for the remainder here, because it's really the simplest way to talk about the guide is to actually refer to the guide. And for you all who are interested in learning more about it, I just encourage you to get in there and look for answers to your questions, play around in there, and have conversations with your coworkers about what you see. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to actually jump into talking about the first guidance that we provide, which is to build a class implementation team, which will look different depending on whether you are a system level leader working maybe in a state department of ed, a regional leader working maybe in a regional office. They're called different things in different places, or if you're a site level leader. It might be a slightly less formal team if you're a site level leader. I think from just skimming, we've got a decent amount of site leaders on this call, and you might think of your team as your mix of educators who can help you understand a variety of perspectives related to your class implementation. So the guidance that we provide around this is to invite a variety of perspectives across roles, across levels of experience, perhaps across kinds of expertise or relationships. Second piece of guidance is to distribute responsibilities with clarity and cohesion. That's particularly important at the system and regional levels when you're implementing class and essentially you're creating new work. It needs to be really clear who's responsible for what within that new set of work. And then the third piece of guidance is to build and sustain class capacities through certifying individuals to support your efforts to measure and improve interactions. I'm seeing Kim's question, and I'm not going to be good at responding to everything in the chat in the moment. I would recommend that if you do want to print the doc, I would actually recommend you don't print it, but there's a couple PDFs throughout it that you can print. But if you truly want to print it, and for whatever reason, it's too big of a document, you can save you can print in sections, so you can do certain pages. Anyway, let me go back to LaWanda, and really, we wanted LaWanda on to talk about what does this really look like in action in a couple of her relationships. And so my question for this first action, LaWanda, is how have you seen partners effectively distribute class-related responsibilities with cohesion across site level, regional, and state leaders?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And so for those of you that don't know, I, again, have been with Teachstone for 8 years, been, like Isabella stated, I've been in education for over 20 plus years. So I've been part of several teams implementing class, working with several organizations, supporting their work with class. So thank you, Matt, for having me on to share those different perspectives. In my work with class, one of the partners that I will call attention to that I've worked with closely that has done this well is the Florida Division of Early Learning. Within their organization, they created a coordinated team across the state to really leverage their support of the class implementation. And while this work was not done without pitfalls, of course it wasn't, and no implementation is it done seamlessly. There's always some method or some obstacle that you're going to encounter that you're going to learn from, but they created a model that they learned from and that they were able to grow from, that has allowed them to really lean into the perspectives of what they have is called coalitions that serves their regional, that serves as regional providers across the state in supporting providers. They also leaned in on the school districts, the directors that support families. I mean, all of these are, stakeholders that really help guide their decision-making process, help to guide the legislature that has now expanded class into their now VPK classrooms across the state. So that's one organization. I think another unique piece about that work that stands out to me is that they created those leads to really serve as a knowledge base for each of the coalitions throughout the state, which within those coalitions, they were able to distribute those responsibilities that you were speaking of across the state to be able to distribute it amongst their coaches, distributed amongst their coaching staff, the PD leaders, to really create a foundation for learning about class. And I think that's important because as you build a model for its sustainability, being able to have a model in place that creates that sustainability and building coaching capacity to deliver your observation services, to deliver your coaching services, to continue to support these efforts. And so in thinking about that work, they really understood that every leader had a stake in the success of their class implementation, that really brought in a different perspective and understanding how this work is going to impact the families that they serve across the state, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we were always trying to reduce our word count. So initially, this one was called Build and Maintain a Class Implementation Team. So since I have you all on the call, I do think it's important to think about and plan for turnover, which is inevitable, right? People are going to move elsewhere. They're going to also, for all sorts of reasons. And having distributed roles with clarity and cohesion helps you know when you've lost someone who was fulfilling a given role and plan for backfilling. So that's so much more good stuff to talk about here, but let's actually move on to the second action, which is one of my favorites, which is investing stakeholders and interactions in the class system. Part of the reason I love this one is that absolutely everyone in the system can fully participate in it. We'll talk about some parts of your class implementation that certain individuals may have less control over. And so it's really more so guidance for those that have the authority to, like, for instance, influence the ways in which class data is collected.
Mm-hmm.
But as it relates to investment, everyone can play a part. And the guidance that we provide around this is to, demonstrate the benefits of interactions in the class framework, which is a shift, one of the important shifts from our old PDF guidance documents that focused a little bit more on explaining why class was so important, which there is a place for sharing new information, but because I'm going to make a generalization that people, particularly people in ECE, value relationships. I don't think I'm going out on a limb on that. And the way we build relationships are through interactions. So these moment-to-moment interactions that are the building blocks for our relationships are valued by all, and therefore everyone already has some value in interactions. And what we actually have in the guide is an activity to help show people rather than tell them about the value of interactions, and then map onto it. The language of class helps us describe those interactions in a way that helps us build a community that's focused on them and can actually, measure and improve them. We also recommend that you align class to your existing efforts. This is one of, I think, the harder pieces of guidance to implement, but is super important so that class doesn't feel separate from other initiatives, but that you have a cohesive set of initiatives and expectations and resources, ranging from how you communicate expectations about what an educator's environment should look like, to how they should communicate with parents, to how they should respond to challenging behaviors. And class can and should be an integral part of those other elements in your broader set of expectations, tools, and resources for educators. And then finally, we encourage you to build foundational knowledge of interactions and class. So there is this phenomenon that when people learn about class, when they have the opportunity to go to a training, they tend to feel really excited about it. They tend to feel affirmed by it, and they tend to be more excited after learning more than they were when they previously were relying on whatever prior experience they had of how people have talked about class or how class has happened to them. So the more people get to engage with it, they tend to have more and more positive experiences. So Luana, for this one, I just wanted to ask for what's one of your favorite stories about how leaders have kind of changed the hearts and minds of stakeholders as it relates to interactions in class?
I would say my favorite story would be the work that was done in Dallas Independent School District. I came from Dallas ISD, was part of a team that implemented class in our pre-K through second grade classrooms. So the work there has always resonated with me well, because I saw it from the beginning of people like rejecting this idea of someone coming into your classroom, asking us to change the way we do things, to it being like, oh, we love this tool. I think that one of the things that the leaders that led that work, being Dominique McCain and Derek Little, stressed before the work even started was that change is hard. Change is emotional. And as we set out to do this work, it was going to require educators to think about what they were going to do in the classroom differently every day, and have leaders think about how they were going to go about doing things differently in a way to really promote the work that we were trying to do. And that was not an easy task to do right off the bat. But I think they both did an amazing job at providing direction and really providing clarity around the implementation purpose of class, which was why were we doing this? And the purpose was to really increase access to pre-K and to ensure that every child left, every child was kindergarten ready and was reading on grade level by the time they reached third grade. That was our ultimate mission. And they did a great job at, motivating leaders and getting that buy-in through lots of listening. Like, we had lots of listening sessions. Like, what are your concerns? What do you already know about class? What can we tell you? Here's what we plan to do, and provided a clear path of how we were going to continue to move the needle with student outcomes through those intentional interactions. The work that we did really embodied class. It really helped all the stakeholders involved to really understand the need and urgency for those quality interactions that we all know leads to student improvement. We were making sure that this wasn't work that was just going to happen in those well-to-do neighborhoods, but also in every single neighborhood child classroom that DISD was serving. So where they not only emphasized the value that class was going to have on children, but it also stressed the value that it was going to have on educators and leaders and how they would benefit from this work. And so that clear communication and laid out path really created the necessary buy-in that was needed to do the work and do it successfully.
Yeah, it's such a lovely example of seeing the ways in which you don't have to choose between children getting developmentally appropriate, really kind of like fulfilling interactions in ECE and academic outcomes. You can choose both, and you can use class as a guideline for thinking about how can we know at early stages that these interactions are driving towards and leading to the kinds of academic outcomes we care about. You mentioned literacy by 3rd grade, but also we've seen that evidence that there's growth in mathematics outcomes, there's growth in reduction in challenging behavior, so an increase in kind of like social competence and improved relationships between educators and children in contexts where interactions are more effective. So I love the alignment that was brought, the really intentional alignment in Dallas between goals around, you mentioned equity and access, academic outcomes, and really high quality interactions, which we might value for their own sake, but they also have these really wonderful downstream impacts for children and educators. There's a graphic in this section that has the benefits for different stakeholders. So if you're looking on your phone, that is one of the quick, easy to snag, useful things. Pull it into your presentations, put it in your emails, take screenshots. Please use this guide, however it works for you, to help communicate why a focus on interactions is really great for everyone within the system. Okay, we could obviously go on, but let's shift into how we provide guidance on how to measure educator-child interactions using class. And we begin with just saying plan for it. So from a leadership perspective, the first action is to plan, right? And this will set you up to do the subsequent actions of communicating well and actually facilitating your class observations effectively. So I'm going to jump to the measure section in the guide. The guidance that we provide around planning is to select the data to collect based on your goals. So we're not saying like select which class dimensions to observe, but just to be intentional about what decisions do you want to inform, potentially informing what additional data you might want to collect. You might also choose to collect, for instance, class environment data so that you can provide input into decisions about how you want your classroom environments to be set up. Also to distribute the measurement specific responsibilities ranging from scheduling to ensuring that follow-up feedback conversations happen with educators, and then setting up any technology that you have as a part of your data collection effort, such as thinking about where will this data live, how will people see it. And my question for you, Lawanda, is where have you seen planning for class data collection go well, and what stood out about that partner's approach?
I'm going to lean into the work that we did in Dallas once more. One of the things that we did as we decided to collect that data on a large scale was to allocate the measurement specific responsibilities to an outside entity to collect that data. This allowed us that was doing the work to maintain the relationships that we had both with the administrators and the educators that we were supporting during that process. Even though we outsourced it, we built the protocols for the observations, the quality assurance protocols to ensure the data was of fidelity and that the observers that were going into the classroom were meeting the protocols that we had set for that third-party entity, following the fidelity of Teachstone guidance. And we clearly communicated the observer expectations for all of our stakeholders. We provided the timelines, what they should expect before, during, and after an observation. And so this really helped educators be at ease, help our administrators that we were supporting to be at ease. So having someone coming into their building and into their classrooms. And even though our team was not specifically responsible for collecting the formal data, we were required to still maintain our observer certifications and calibrate frequently. Why? This really was to ensure that we were able to go in and conduct informal observations, make sure that as we're conducting those informal observations, we knew exactly what those former observers will go in and look for, be able to speak the class language fluently, be able to really support our educators in planning around intentionality so that when they do get observed, this is not something new that they're doing, and really help them understand that you guys are already doing all of these great things. Now we're just adding language and putting labels on the great things that you're doing. Let's keep doing those things so that when someone does come into your classroom, it's not a shock. And so I believe our approach to this really allowed us to maintain the integrity of the work that we were doing. It maintain integrity to our mission, and really help educators be impactful in helping every child be successful, both socially and academically.
Yeah, and something you said is such a great segue into our fourth action that we talk about regarding preparing educators for class observations. There's this saying in performance management, in like organizational environments, corporate environments, that nothing you share in a performance review should be a surprise. Should be something you've already been having ongoing feedback conversations about. So if you go to the next slide, there's kind of a similar idea here of educators should already be primed for, why this observation is happening, what the information will look like when they get it in the context of, hopefully, what we recommend is a collaborative feedback conversation where they can share their experiences and their input and their interests in terms of growth. But the fourth action is really all about communicating with educators about observations, where we provide guidance on explaining what to expect, including providing a PDF that can be used as is, but can also be a starting point for your more specific communications. We didn't include things like, will the observation be announced or unannounced, because that's an example of something you need to decide within the context of your particular observation effort, depending on your goals. And then the second piece of guidance we offer is to emphasize how observations link to improvement efforts. So if they're getting any amount of coaching or professional development, or if they have access to a library of resources, how does this information align to the support that they're getting to improve? And making sure that they understand these things before the class observation happens, so that educators are more likely to benefit from the really powerful data that they're getting, the powerful interaction they're having, hopefully in that feedback session, about their interactions with children. So Luana, my question for this one is, where have you seen partners really effectively communicate with educators in advance of their class observations?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on this somewhat briefly on the previous slide, but I do feel like most of the organizations that I work with and support and have supported in the past has done a great job at communicating the why behind a class observation and what those next steps will be and what they should look like. Oftentimes, the message may get lost when an educator hears the word observation. They often think of it as something punitive. And I think one of the things that I've seen Dallas ISD and the state of Florida do really well is encourage educators to focus on that how they're already effectively interacting with children. And let's just continue to do more of that so we can build on those effective things that you're doing. one of the things that I feel like programs can do before conducting an observation, you stated it clearly, like communicate the expectations, the before, the during, and the after, so that educators can be at ease. Because again, you know, we already are skeptical of thinking that when someone come into our classroom, that it's something punitive. And so making sure that, hey, when someone coming into your classroom, they're looking for all the great things that you're doing. And here's how, when the data is collected, is going to impact the work that you're doing. So we need to ensure that, of course, that organizations are not just communicating the why, but also how am I going to be impacted, and what can I do collaboratively to ensure the greater good, not just for the children, but for the success of the campus I'm serving as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. And Anna's coming in with a reality check that is certainly true in lots of state contexts, and also often a Head Start context where, okay, sure, this all sounds nice, but when it is in this environment of accountability and there are implications for program funding, it's going to feel different. And so to oversimplify, there's two responses to that. One is to say, therefore, we can't really position class as a support for educators because in our context, it's being used as a funding mechanism, as a quality assurance tool to make sure public dollars are going towards programs that are the most effective for children. But the other response is to say, it is actually more important that we position class and show our educators that it is a tool for improvement and that we're using this data to support them, because we know we're fighting against this real and perceived like function of class as a strictly an accountability tool. So in context where you need to, and the burden is on you as a regional or site level leader to establish a focus on class as both, yeah, like we can't change the fact that it's being used for accountability in these specific ways, but we also are going to use it as a part of our coaching, as a part of our culture, as a part of how we think about our jobs as an early care entity. You have a kind of a challenge. I recently was on the phone. I won't say I didn't get permission to say their name, but they're their Head Start program. And they have embedded class in their coaching model and in all parts of their program. I won't say all, they're working to integrate it into more elements of their program. And even in that context of Head Start, where there are stakes associated with your class, because class is not only used in that official federal way, educators' association with it is more positive, it's more improvement oriented. And 3 of their 7 programs are now performing really, really well. And so thank you for your question, Anna. I think it's not as simple as an either or like I present it, but I just encourage you to think about in those contexts where class is used for accountability, a lot of the guidance is even more important to take up in those settings rather than think about it as not possible to position educators to experience class in these ways. I wonder, Lawanda, if you have any thoughts on that. I know yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree, Matt, that it's not an either or, but definitely when thinking about employing it in like your coaching improvement service, like providing those collaborative coaching conversations to support those efforts. Like I stated before, within Dallas ISD really helped us to maintain our accountability for the work that we were doing in the classroom. So not only educators were held accountable, but we too were held accountable in supporting the impact and changes that were taking place in the classroom. So definitely, again, just thinking about as you're implementing it, making sure the message is clear, making sure that all stakeholders involved really have that clear guidance on what it will look like, the impact it's going to have, and what we're trying to do with employing this type of tool.
And this is actually a nice segue to the 5th action, because one of the ways we encourage you to share actionable data to inform decisions is to have a collaborative feedback conversation with educators. Because ultimately, like, I think this is maybe just a personal belief, but I think our perceptions of things are most impacted by how we directly experience them. So the more positive experiences an educator has with class, even if it is, like a hard conversation that helps them improve, if it's in the context of a trusting, collaborative relationship, they're more likely to see the value of class because they just experienced it firsthand. So our guidance on sharing actionable data goes beyond just sharing with educators, but includes outlining audience-specific communications, presenting data to inform specific decisions, and sharing class feedback with educators is a section unto itself. And so for this one, Lawanda, my question is, have you seen partners share data in ways that informed specific decision making?
Yeah, I think that one of the ways in which, again, that I've seen it done is that we don't always start out with, here are your opportunities for growth. Like oftentimes when data is being shared, you start out with the negative, which really deter and turn educators off from hearing anything else, because all you hear is all I do is something wrong. And so in thinking about how data is being shared, I think organizations I've worked with have done it in many different ways. Definitely creating a system that outlines the decisions class data will inform, the what, the when, and the how it will be shared is definitely going to be important. I think sharing the information during coaching conversations, as I mentioned previously, has a tremendous impact on how educators receive the class data, because I think that creates an opportunity for collaborative conversations to take place as both those strengths and those opportunity of growth are identified, because that relationship ultimately lies with that coach and that educator. And so the way that that partnership has been created and how that partnership is sustained really allows for that collaborative conversation to plan around those effective interactions once that feedback is received. I've also seen an amount of information shared, can, be a very delicate balance in understanding, how much information to provide versus the information that would be too much to overwhelm, those that are receiving it to inform improvement. And so definitely thinking about those challenges and making sure that as you plan that out, identifying that balance. And the key, I think, is just keep working at it and find a useful method that really makes sense for your organization. And I will say that I think the data collection platform that we have does a great job for organizations that struggle with what information do I want to share out? How do I even analyze the data? Because our system automates the data for you to really be able to analyze it in a method that is meaningful. And it also provides a way for you to customize your options, the options that are very specific to your organizational needs.
When I was a teacher, I was introduced to this principle of activities for a large group. So I was a middle and high school teacher. So I had, up to 30 people in my classroom, and creating a low threshold and a high ceiling for each activity, which is essentially an idea in differentiation. But you make it easy for everyone to enter into the activity. And then you also present different levels of engagement. And in that context, it would be like more challenging for students that had built more prior knowledge or understanding or skills related to the activity. In this context, it would be someone who's for the first time seeing class data or only has 5 minutes. Like, what is the quick takeaway? But then also present it in such a way as our system does that lets you dig into it, analyze it, look at trends, and really ask those questions about how might we make meaning from this information and make better decisions as a result. Which takes us into how do you actually improve interactions? We give you 3 recommendations. The first is to use class data to plan for improvement. The guidance we provide around that is how to intentionally analyze and interpret class data, to set clear and specific improvement goals, and then to build action plans aligned to those goals. So Lawanda, where have you seen leaders spend time analyzing class data in order to set really specific improvement goals?
I know I keep talking about Dallas ISD.
That's okay. That's okay.
But this is only because I was involved in that work and it was a large scale implementation. And so when you take that into account and thinking about all of the educators that we served in creating a class journey to really sustain continuous improvement, our journey consisted of 3 different phases. The first phase was that assessment piece where we really used the initial scores to serve as our baseline to inform us of those quality children experiences that we're having in the classroom. And then we also used that data to really identify what was leading to those experiences to inform improvement. And so from there, we created a foundation. So through that data and leveraging the data allowed us to be able to build a foundation where we really began to leverage class as a tool for improvement. And here is where we develop, the readiness among teachers and coaches. We build foundational competencies necessary to really allow for us to focus on those sustainability efforts, which then allowed us to, of course, now that we've measured and improved, like we stated earlier on in our presentation, we're now able to, sustain this work and build a continuum, because after we laid out that foundation, that's what you're in, a continuum. And so this is where we started to build that sustainability phase, where we're providing ongoing class professional development, creating systems to really sustain the relationships that we had, and really continue to improve and move the needle that were impacting those positive student-teacher interactions that we started to see within the class scores. All the work that we did, of course, like I stated, and continue to say and will continue to say, has to be a collaborative effort, because through those collaborations, it created a culture of shared commitment from everyone. All of the stakeholders that were involved had ownership in making sure that this work was impactful. And as we needed to adjust our focus from one dimension or one domain to the next, the template and model that we created allowed us the flexibility for that change. So just using the data to be able to really evaluate, like, what are the trends? What's leading to the impact that we're seeing and moving the needle, and allowing us to be able to use that data to say, okay, here's the area of focus, whether it's going to be the instructional support domain, or maybe we needed to start with emotional support so that we can get to instructional support. Whatever it was, we were able to leverage that class data first to be able to identify those improvement efforts.
That's great. Thank you, Luanda. And you can keep talking about Dallas. That's great. I should say one of the hopes for the guide is that we embed over time, more rich examples from places like Dallas and lots of other implementations to show how there's many different ways to implement in ways that align to the guidance here. So the seventh action that we focus on is to actually help educators adopt new practices. You've looked at your data, you've set these goals, and we offer guidance around one of the distinctive values of class is that it can help educators see effective interactions. They don't necessarily need to be able to code reliably on the tool, but it is, the research backs up that when educators can notice and name interactions in ways that align to the class tool, it supports their improvement of those interactions. The second piece of guidance is about leveraging educator effectiveness. If you've taken anything from Teachstone, you know that a big part of our approach in coaching is to say, look, you're already doing this at this time of day or with this group of children. What would it look like to bring those practices, those interactions to another time of day to extend your effectiveness? It's not the only strategy, but it is a really useful strategy. We provide some guidance on in this microsite. And then the last piece of guidance is about narrowing the focus to bite size bite size, that's a metaphor, to approachable sizes for learning objectives for your educators. So Lawanda, my question here is, what's an example where you've seen leaders help educators see effective interactions?
Yeah, one way I will lean in on are pathways. I've seen leaders really think through, okay, now that we have this data, what can we do to not overwhelm educators, but really start, I won't say bite size, but really provide them professional development opportunities to increase their intentionalities in chunks. And so one example of a pathway I will give or seen important to help educators is to start them out with class foundations. So this is where they can, start out with class foundation, which was designed to really take educators from where they are with their relationship with class, even they may be the most novice, have no idea of what class is, and then take them to a place of excitement about using class and improving their day-to-day work. And so within the pathways that I've seen, additional training opportunities were created to move them from that basic knowledge of foundation to now enhancing that knowledge gain and really helping them to implement those interactions in practice. And one of the tools used was through class group coaching, which focuses on that know, see, do piece. Now that I know about it, now let me see it in action so that I can see how this relates to my everyday work, because people need to see it in order to be able to connect the information that is being learned. And so I've seen leaders do that, as well as create like core coaching teams to support moving educators' knowledge, like I stated, from that novice to that experience phase. And so once they learn about it, of course, those coaches can now help them be intentional about implementing those interactions, planning around those interactions, and identifying what time of day am I doing this effectively and how can I expand it, like you stated before. And I think what tends to happen is that when they're following these pathways, the more knowledge they gain, the more teachers saw that these were already interactions they were already having with children. Again, like I stated, they became excited about it and became more intentional about doing it and becoming comfortable with the ideal of someone coming into their classroom, excited about recording themselves for their own personal growth. So once again, creating those pathways to really help teachers learn about it, that know piece, then see it in action so that they can then move to that planning phase is impactful.
Thanks, Lawanda. And you touched on this, but with your allusions to coaching, but I think just quickly before we get into Q&A, we want to talk about the last action as a part of a class implementation is to build class coaching capacity. I'm going to, since we're here, I'm going to show you under the hood a little bit. We debated this one. We're like, well, not everyone has funding for coaches and not everyone is able to, provide a coach to every educator. And we decided to still include this in the guide because the research is really strong on the power of coaching. And so we provide guidance on, that maybe would help you advocate for resources for coaches, whether you do business with us or not. The guidance we provide is that these coaches should build interactions knowledge. They should grow their own competencies to have effective adult-adult interactions, and then use evidence-based coaching practices, some of which, Teachstone has products and services aligned to. So very quickly, Lawanda, can you share just an example of a partner that invests in coaching staff's knowledge and skills as it relates to interactions in class?
Yeah, like I said, class group coaching is one. Organizations have invested in class group coaching, which is a 3-day coach training that really enhances teachers' knowledge one dimension at a time. Another program that they use for their coaches to even build on their coach competencies, this class master coaching, which is, that 2-year program that focuses on building their coach competencies through video coaching and informal observations. Again, with any coaching model that you choose to use and be intentional with, I think intentional investments create that opportunity for organizations and the organizational coaches to unpack the context of the interactions and hone their own coach educator competencies to really, maximize the engagement and coaching, increase their coaching integrity.
Yeah.
That was really quick. Sorry, I was like trying to condense it all.
I know. I appreciate it. So I see one question in the Q&A that we've perhaps touched on. So I'm just going to say I'm answering this one live. But thank you, Stephanie, for submitting that. Stephanie asked what practices are particularly helpful for educators that are new to class. And we know that so many of our educators are not just new to class, but are new to the classroom. We have a partner who talks about people being 18 and breathing when they come in as assistant educators, right? Because that's the state of things right now. And I think some of what LaWanda alluded to regarding our introductory class products like Class Primer, Intro to Interactions really do a good job of laying out like, here is what we mean when we say effective interactions, and providing that baseline is a really great starting point. And so I'm going to kick it to you, LaWanda, to kind of talk about like, what else have you seen be really effective for early career educators?
Definitely CDA for early those that are just teacher assistants supporting in the classroom, wanting to move to, because they too are working with children. Our CDA program, Foundations for Teachers, Interactions Essentials, the MMCI, which is the new Interactions Essentials for Educators, which is really foundational in really supporting educators to really, again, learn about the interactions one dimension at a time, see it, and be intentional about trying it out without being overwhelmed with trying to do everything at once. But let's just be intentional about doing this one dimension effectively so that we can continue to build on that. And from there, I believe that teachers just become comfortable with the idea and the language and being able to identify within their own practice when they are demonstrating these interactions. So again, the more they learn about it, the more they see it in action, the more they're able to become comfortable with the idea of doing it on their own.
Well, we have a few more minutes for questions. We're coming to the end though. I did see one, Matt, I don't know if you answered this already, the MMCI group coaching book, is that changing to the new edition?
I think we should follow up on how to answer that one. What I can say for sure is that our product suites are going to evolve to second edition. And I am not the most up to date on our product plans or how we're rolling those out. So I apologize for not being able to answer you in the moment, Lori Beth. But our team can definitely follow up with you. With if there's another minute to answer like supporting new educators, I would encourage you to think about oh yeah, thank you, Anna. The compliments to your feedback, that's part of what made it so much better. Having an onboarding plan for your like, I wouldn't underestimate how important the first few weeks of someone's employment is, and having a structured plan for how to expose those people to not just the licensing requirements, the health and safety, not, like you have to do those things and you don't compromise on them at all, but also include a real intentional focus on interactions and the ways in which class can support them as educators. How is it good for you as an educator to learn about and engage in class? There's studies that show that educators' cortisol levels go down when they begin to interact more effectively with children. I don't know about you all, but life is stressful enough. If there's a way for me to reduce my stress, I'm going to pay attention to it. So I just really encourage you to think about your onboarding programs and how interactions in class can be central to those, and that the educator's experience is not overwhelmingly about these kind of state mandated health and safety type things. Of course, it will be to some degree.
And I just want to remind you all that you can check out our events page on our website to see like upcoming webinars. We have more webinars in the works and demos coming up. Train the Trainer is going to be next. And don't forget that you will receive your recording of today's session as well as the slides and other resources mentioned, links to that implementation guide and how to reach out to somebody from Teachstone via email tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to say thank you again to Matt and Lawanda for being such excellent hosts and being so thorough with the information today. We're excited to have you here, and we're excited that you all were able to attend.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Alonda.
Thanks. Bye.